You think African-American pie traditions stopped at sweet potato and pecan? Think again. Black kitchens across generations created dozens of extraordinary pies that have quietly vanished from our tables. Let's dig into 60 African-American pies no one makes anymore. Buttered rum pie was the warmth of celebration baked in liquid gold. Along the southern coast, where rum flowed easily from ports and trade ships, families learned to fold its sweetness into desserts that carried both comfort and cheer. Butter, brown sugar, and cream simmered together before being whisked into eggs and baked until the pie trembled with richness. The rum gave it a slow heat that lingered long after the first bite, warming both the body and the heart. It was a holiday pie, a Christmas treat shared after songs and suppers, when laughter filled every corner of the house. The crust flaked like pastry snow beneath the heavy filling, and the scent of buttered rum floated through the air like memory itself. Buttered rum pie was the taste of gathering and gratitude, of families finding joy even when the year had been unkind. It was sweet, slow, and soulful, a reminder that the simplest ingredients could still make something grand. Sorghum cream pie was the taste of the fields turned into dessert. Sorghum, that thick amber syrup born from cane presses in long afternoons, sweetened a custard rich with eggs and milk. The pie baked smooth, glossy, and full of depth, smoky, molasses-like, with a sweetness that lingered long after the bite was gone. It was the kind of pie that spoke softly but stayed with you, reminding you of harvests, hard work, and the slow rhythm of country life. Families who grew sorghum by hand took pride in its flavor, knowing it was their labor poured into every spoonful. Sorghum cream pie was more than dessert. It was legacy, the sweet echo of self-reliance and endurance. It connected generations through flavor, from enslaved field hands to freed farmers to grandchildren tasting history at the supper table. It reminded everyone that sweetness earned was sweetness remembered. Sorghum cream pie was not just food. It was testimony, baked golden and still warm with truth. Peanut butter pie was born from the southern soil itself, from the farmers, the harvests, and the humble peanut that changed everything. The filling was creamy, rich, and slightly salty, made from whipped peanut butter, sugar, and milk poured into a flaky crust. It was sweet but strong, a dessert that didn't need permission to stand out. During lean years, this pie meant protein and pride, a way to stretch what little you had into something worthy of Sunday. The taste was both comforting and bold, earthy from the peanuts, soft from the cream, and full of satisfaction. For many families, it became a sign that things were getting better, that there was enough again to make something special. Children licked the spoons clean while elders smiled, remembering harder times that had slowly turned gentle. Peanut butter pie was thrift turned to luxury, proof that the ground beneath your feet could give you both sustenance and sweetness. It was the South's quiet answer to hunger, humble, hearty, and home. Cornmeal pie was as humble as the hands that mixed it. Made from cornmeal, milk, butter, and sugar, it straddled the line between bread and dessert, rich enough for company, but plain enough for every day. The batter baked into a golden, lightly gritty filling with a crisp crust and a smooth center. It was a pie that didn't pretend to be anything else, and that was its charm. Cornmeal pie turned a farm staple into something indulgent without waste or excess. Families ate it warm from the oven, topped with a drizzle of sorghum or a spoonful of cream if they had it. It was simple food made sacred by tradition. Cornmeal pie tasted of hearth and patience, of quiet evenings when sweetness was rare and shared sparingly. It carried the soul of the South, resourceful, honest, and proud. Every bite told a story of survival through creativity, of making do and making joy. Cornmeal pie was the dessert that didn't need celebration to matter. It was celebration enough by itself. Sorghum cream pie was the taste of the fields turned into dessert. Sorghum, that thick amber syrup born from cane presses in long afternoons, sweetened a custard rich with eggs and milk. The pie baked smooth, glossy, and full of depth, smoky, molasses-like, with a sweetness that lingered long after the bite was gone. It was the kind of pie that spoke softly but stayed with you, reminding you of harvests, hard work, and the slow rhythm of country life. Families who grew sorghum by hand took pride in its flavor, knowing it was their labor poured into every spoonful. Sorghum cream pie was more than dessert. It was legacy, the sweet echo of self-reliance and endurance. It connected generations through flavor, from enslaved field hands to freed farmers to grandchildren tasting history at the supper table. It reminded everyone that sweetness earned was sweetness remembered. Sorghum cream pie was not just food, it was testimony, baked golden and still warm with truth. Blackberry hand pies were the taste of summer caught between crusts. Children and grandparents picked the berries along fences and forest edges, their fingers stained purple by sunset. The filling bubbled with sugar and wild fruit, wrapped in lard pastry that fried crisp and golden in cast-iron pans. These pies were small enough to hold, perfect for workers in the fields or travelers on long roads. Each bite was sweet and sharp, full of thorns and sunlight, proof that nature still gave freely. Blackberries did not need tending, they just needed gathering, and that made these pies a blessing. They cooled on windowsills, wrapped in cloth, and disappeared before morning. Blackberry hand pies were love-made portable, dessert for people who could not afford rest but still found joy in a handful of dough and fruit. They were the South's sweetest rebellion against hunger. Sweet potato custard pie was the gentler cousin of the famous sweet potato pie, softer, silkier, and quieter in its sweetness. The filling was made from freshly mashed sweet potatoes, rich farm eggs, sugar, milk, and a whisper of nutmeg. Slow baking turned it into something that barely held its shape, trembling with warmth and memory. The flavor was delicate but deep, caramel, vanilla, and earth all in harmony. Sweet potato custard pie was the dessert of holidays, revivals, and reunions, its orange glow bright as autumn sunlight. It reminded people of family kitchens filled with chatter, of gardens where the roots came from, of hands that stirred without measuring. Every spoonful carried the taste of love turned practical, nothing wasted, everything treasured. It was a pie that spoke of the land, of patience, and of the people who made sweetness out of endurance. For many, it was the first dessert they learned to bake and the last one they ever forgot. Sweet potato custard pie was heritage made edible, tender, golden, and rooted in resilience. Rhubarb and ginger pie was spring's first surprise, tart and fiery all at once, bursting with color and strength after the long quiet of winter. The stalks were chopped and tossed with sugar, the ginger grated fine to add its warm brightness, sharp enough to wake the senses. As it baked, the filling turned ruby red and glistened like glass under its buttery crust. The scent carried through the kitchen like a promise, fresh and wild, filling even the smallest homes with life again. For families who grew their own medicine and their own meals, this pie was both comfort and cure. The first bite hit with a jolt, sour, spicy, and sweet, before melting into something tender and familiar. Rhubarb and ginger pie reminded everyone that healing and hunger were not so far apart, that both could be fed at the same table. It was the taste of resilience disguised as luxury, proof that beauty could grow out of the hardest soil. It stood as a hymn to renewal, humble yet radiant, fierce yet full of grace. Water pie was one of the cleverest Depression-era inventions, proving dessert could still be made when cupboards were bare. African-American families mixed water, sugar, flour, and butter in a crust, baking until it thickened into a soft, custard-like filling. The taste was surprisingly sweet and creamy, making it feel like more than the sum of its parts. Families valued it not just for flavor, but for what it represented: resilience and resourcefulness in the hardest years. It showed that joy could be found even when money and supplies were scarce. Its simplicity made it accessible, a dessert almost anyone could prepare. Today, water pie has nearly disappeared, but it remains a reminder of how kitchens stretched every scrap to keep spirits lifted. For those who remember, it was more than a recipe. It was proof of hope baked into every slice, a clever way of turning almost nothing into comfort. Peanut butter pie was born from the southern soil itself, from the farmers, the harvests, and the humble peanut that changed everything. The filling was creamy, rich, and slightly salty, made from whipped peanut butter, sugar, and milk poured into a flaky crust. It was sweet but strong, a dessert that didn't need permission to stand out. During lean years, this pie meant protein and pride, a way to stretch what little you had into something worthy of Sunday. The taste was both comforting and bold, earthy from the peanuts, soft from the cream, and full of satisfaction. For many families, it became a sign that things were getting better, that there was enough again to make something special. Children licked the spoons clean while elders smiled, remembering harder times that had slowly turned gentle. Peanut butter pie was thrift turned to luxury, proof that the ground beneath your feet could give you both sustenance and sweetness. It was the South's quiet answer to hunger, humble, hearty, and home. Buttermilk chess pie was proof that simplicity could still feel like abundance. Made from eggs, sugar, butter, and a splash of tangy buttermilk, it baked into a soft, custard-like center with a golden, crackled top. It was rich but not fancy, sweet but with just enough edge to keep it honest. Every Southern kitchen had its own version. Some added cornmeal for texture, others a dash of vinegar for balance. It was the kind of dessert you made without a recipe because you already knew how it should feel in your hands. The scent of buttermilk chess pie filled kitchens after Sunday service, where laughter, gospel, and good food met. It spoke of fellowship, of tables crowded with stories and second helpings. It did not need adornment. No whipped cream, no garnish, no show, just a pie tin, a warm oven, and faith that it would come together. Buttermilk chess pie became the symbol of contentment in hard times, its sweetness grounded in gratitude. It was comfort baked into tradition, familiar enough to feel like home no matter where life carried you. One bite, and you remembered everything good that endures. Sweet corn pie blurred the line between supper and dessert, between what was needed and what was loved. Made from fresh summer corn shaved carefully off the cob, it baked into a custard that was creamy, golden, and kissed with the taste of sunlight. A little sugar, a little butter, and the faint crunch of the corn made each bite both hearty and gentle. Families in the country served it with whatever they had, sometimes greens, sometimes beans, sometimes nothing at all, but grace. It filled bellies and hearts, a quiet celebration of the harvest that never failed to come. Sweet corn pie reminded everyone that sweetness could come from the soil, not the store, from hands that planted rather than purchased. It smelled like the end of summer and the promise of full barns. It was the kind of dish that made even an empty table feel abundant. Each spoonful carried a lesson in gratitude that even the simplest things could be enough. Sweet corn pie was a hymn of plenty, sung softly from stove to table, a reminder that the earth always gave more than it took. Molasses pie was the dark sweetness of endurance baked into a crust. When sugar was rare and luxury was far away, molasses, thick, rich, and smoky, became the backbone of Southern desserts. Families used sorghum or blackstrap, whisking it into eggs, flour, and a touch of milk until it baked into a filling that shimmered like old amber. Each slice was deep with flavor, part caramel, part earth, and part memory. It was a pie that didn't need frills or fruit, just time and faith that it would set right. The smell filled cabins and farmhouses with the scent of something sweet, earned through hard work. Molasses pie reminded people of their connection to the land, to the cane fields, to the soil that gave both hardship and life. It was a dessert made to last, rich enough to feel like celebration even in times of scarcity. For many Black families in the South, it became a holiday standard, eaten slowly with coffee or milk, enjoyed long after supper had ended. Molasses pie was the kind of comfort that did not fade quickly, a flavor that stayed long after the last bite, heavy with history and warmth. Potato pie, the savory sweet cousin of its better-known counterpart, was food for every hour of the day and for every kind of hunger. Mashed potatoes were stirred with butter, milk, and just a touch of sugar, forming a filling that was neither quite dessert nor fully dinner. It was soft, earthy, and rich, the kind of dish that could make something out of almost nothing. Served warm in the evening or cold from the icebox the next morning, it carried the comfort of home with every bite. The smell of baking potatoes, butter, and crust filled the kitchen with quiet warmth, a scent as steady as the hands that made it. On lean nights, potato pie turned scraps into satisfaction, proof that creativity could feed more than the stomach. It blurred boundaries, living somewhere between savory and sweet, practicality and pleasure. Families passed it from table to table, never writing it down but never forgetting either. Potato pie was humble but confident, born from survival yet full of grace. It reminded everyone that the simplest crop could nourish both body and soul, and that sometimes invention was the most beautiful flavor of all. Raisin chess pie was a way to make luxury out of what came cheap. Dried raisins, bought in bulk or traded in town, stretched a few eggs and sugar into something that tasted rich. The raisins melted slightly as the custard baked, leaving soft bursts of sweetness in every slice. It was a dessert that made the ordinary feel like a feast, its golden top cracking under the first warm bite. Families served it after church, proud to offer something sweet even in lean months. Raisin chess pie was proof that thrift and love could make anything taste better. It turned scarcity into celebration, each piece a reminder that dessert was never about what you had, but how you used it. The flavor lingered like memory itself, humble, warm, and deeply Southern. Spice vinegar. Chess pie was a Southern baker's masterpiece in contrast, as daring as it was delicate. Vinegar gave the custard its sharp edge, while cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove softened it into warmth. The filling shimmered gold, thick and smooth beneath its crisp sugar top, crackling like glass with the first slice. The smell drifted through the house, sweet and sharp all at once, filling the air with anticipation. It was the kind of dessert that required both courage and care. Too much spice would drown it, too little, and it lost its fire. Each bite delivered balance, tang meeting sweetness, comfort meeting curiosity. It was served proudly at suppers where ingredients were few but flavor was everything. Spice vinegar. Chess pie offered more than nourishment. It offered pride in a kitchen that could make beauty from limitation. The flavor lingered long after the meal, tasting faintly of gratitude and quiet strength. It was a dessert that refused to be ordinary, teaching that boldness had its own kind of sweetness. Prune pie was the dessert of endurance, sweetened by patience and the wisdom of those who made do. Dried prunes, softened with sugar, spice, and thyme, transformed into a dark, glossy filling rich with depth. Its flavor was mellow but confident, the taste of something built to last. Families baked it when fruit was scarce, when every bit of sweetness had to be earned. It filled kitchens with the scent of molasses and comfort, reminding everyone that sweetness could still be found in hard seasons. Soldiers carried it, travelers packed it, and mothers baked it to stretch what they had. Each slice was dense and velvety, proof that time itself could turn humble ingredients into something generous. Prune pie was more than dessert. It was a promise that even what seemed dried out could bloom again. Its flavor lingered, dark and soft, a quiet echo of perseverance. In every bite was a memory of thrift turned into tradition, of survival turned into sweetness. Green tomato pie was proof that waste was never an option. When frost threatened to ruin the last of the garden, cooks gathered firm, unripe tomatoes and treated them like fruit. Sliced thin and tossed with sugar, cinnamon, and a touch of vinegar, they baked into a pie that looked strange but tasted like revelation. The tartness of the tomatoes balanced beautifully against the spice, creating a dessert both unexpected and irresistible. Green tomato pie turned survival into surprise, using what was left to make what was loved. Families served it proudly, knowing it told a story of ingenuity and heart. It was the kind of recipe whispered between neighbors, passed down without written words, but with quiet reverence. The first bite confused the tongue, part apple, part citrus, all comfort. It was a lesson in gratitude and creativity, a reminder that scarcity could still yield wonder. Green tomato pie was the art of making do and doing it beautifully. Chess pie was a sugary custard pie that once held pride of place in Southern kitchens, including many African American households. Its filling was made from butter, eggs, sugar, and cornmeal, which gave it a slightly grainy texture that set it apart from other pies. The result was a dense, sweet dessert with a caramel-like flavor that lingered on the tongue. Families appreciated it for its simplicity, since all the ingredients were affordable and shelf-stable, making it easy to whip up at a moment's notice. Chess pie was often baked for church suppers, holiday tables, and neighborhood gatherings, where a single pie could be sliced into small but satisfying portions. It represented the ingenuity of cooks who elevated plain ingredients into something beloved. Though recipes still exist in cookbooks, it has quietly faded from everyday tables, replaced by store-bought sweets. Those who remember it recall its sweetness with fondness, tied to voices of mothers and grandmothers serving it with pride. Chess pie was once more than dessert. It was heritage baked into every slice. Chocolate molasses pie carried the taste of endurance and the ache of longing in every dark, glossy slice. During the 1940s, when chocolate was rationed and luxury felt far away, cooks learned to stretch what they had. Cocoa powder and molasses came together to create something deep, smoky, and sweet, more haunting than candy could ever be. The crust was plain, the filling dense and silky, heavy with the aroma of coffee or spice if the cook was lucky enough to have it. As it baked, the pie filled the house with the scent of determination disguised as comfort. Its surface shone like polished wood, smooth and proud despite the hardship that inspired it. Chocolate molasses pie was dessert born from resilience, a way to claim sweetness in a world that often refused it. Each bite unfolded slowly, complex and brave, tasting of both struggle and triumph. It was not just food, it was memory turned edible, love turned tangible, the kind of flavor that lingered longer than hunger. It proved that creativity could make beauty out of scarcity, and that even in lean years, joy could still find its way to the table. Shoofly pie was born from Pennsylvania traditions, but made its way into African American kitchens through migration. Made with molasses and a crumbly topping, the pie had a strong, sweet flavor that lingered with every bite. It was inexpensive to bake and filled bellies at a time when many families could not afford fancy ingredients. By the mid-20th century, Shoofly pie became a familiar sight at church events, bridging cultural influences in a uniquely American way. For civil rights-era families, it symbolized how traditions moved with people, carrying roots from one region into another. Its sticky sweetness reminded children of holidays, while adults saw it as proof that nothing was wasted, not even humble syrup. This pie was never about luxury, but it spoke volumes about resilience and resourcefulness. Shoofly pie proved that desserts could travel just like people, picking up new meanings while still offering comfort across generations. Black walnut pie was the flavor of endurance, bold, dark, and unforgettable. The walnuts were gathered from forests and backyards, their shells so hard they split only under the weight of hammers. Once cracked and chopped, they were mixed with eggs, sugar, and syrup to form a filling that baked dense and fragrant, richer than any pecan pie could dream to be. The taste was deep, almost smoky, with a bitterness that made the sweetness sing. Black walnut pie was not for the faint of heart. It required patience, strong hands, and a belief that the reward was worth the work. The scent of it baking filled the house with comfort, with the sound of the past quietly echoing in every stir of the spoon. It was eaten slowly, respectfully, each slice carrying the story of labor turned to love. For many, it was the flavor of autumn itself, earthy, solemn, and beautiful. Black walnut pie was the South's quiet triumph, proof that from even the hardest shell, something tender and enduring could be found. It was not just dessert, it was persistence made sweet. Transparent pie was a specialty that once filled Black Southern kitchens, a simple but striking dessert with a history tied to Kentucky roots. Made from butter, eggs, sugar, and cream, it created a clear, custard-like filling that shone under its golden crust. African American families made it for gatherings and church suppers, where its sweetness satisfied without the need for expensive ingredients. The pie's simplicity made it accessible, but its glossy, translucent center gave it a touch of elegance that set it apart. It was a recipe passed down through generations, often remembered only by those who grew up watching their elders whisk the filling together. Transparent pie carried the essence of thrift, turning staples into something that looked far more impressive than it cost. Its taste was rich, smooth, and satisfying, a blend of creaminess and sweetness that lingered long after the last bite. Though it has nearly vanished from modern cookbooks and tables, transparent pie remains one of those hidden gems of the past. Remembering it is like opening a window into kitchens where cleverness and tradition created desserts that truly stood the test of time. Brown sugar vinegar pie was the taste of balance, where tang met depth and simplicity met sophistication. Vinegar brought its brightness while brown sugar softened the sharpness, the two weaving together into something richer than either alone. The filling was thick and glowing, caramel-colored and silky smooth, baked until the top trembled beneath a delicate crust. Each slice carried the warmth of molasses and spice, the scent filling every corner of the room. It was a pie for hard times, a war-era creation made when supplies were scarce, but determination ran deep. Bakers understood its lesson without saying a word, that sweetness and struggle often came together. Brown sugar vinegar pie was modest to the eye but regal in spirit, elegant without extravagance. It tasted of endurance and care, of the patience it took to stir hope into hardship. Each bite was a reminder that even life's sharpest edges could be softened by a steady hand and an open heart. Brown sugar pie was pure alchemy, a dessert that took one humble ingredient and spun it into gold. It was syrupy, rich, and deeply sweet, with caramel tones that clung to your tongue long after the last bite. Born from necessity, it came alive when molasses ran out and pantry shelves ran low. A simple mix of sugar, butter, eggs, and cream created something impossibly decadent. The surface baked into a glassy top that cracked softly under a spoon, revealing a silky, molten center. It was the taste of thrift turned into luxury, of hard times sweetened by ingenuity. No one needed a recipe, just memory, intuition, and a steady hand. The pie was thick, honest, and golden brown, a testament to the magic that happened when warmth met sugar. It carried no pretense, no decoration, just comfort baked to perfection. It was the flavor of making do, of creating abundance where there was none, and finding joy in every rich amber bite. Apple cider vinegar pie carried the taste of autumn long after apples were gone. When the barrels were empty and fruit was too costly, vinegar stood in for the tang of cider. Mixed with syrup, butter, and flour, it baked into a custard smooth as caramel with a bright, lingering bite. It fooled guests into thinking apples had been used, and even after they learned the truth, they kept asking for seconds. The pie was humble in appearance but full of warmth, the kind that pulled families close around the table. It spoke of making do without complaint, of turning what was sour into something worth savoring. Apple cider vinegar pie was a quiet masterpiece of survival, tart, golden, and honest. Its sweetness came not from sugar alone, but from gratitude, patience, and the hands that refused to waste a thing. Green tomato pie was proof that waste was never an option. When frost threatened to ruin the last of the garden, cooks gathered firm, unripe tomatoes and treated them like fruit. Sliced thin and tossed with sugar, cinnamon, and a touch of vinegar, they baked into a pie that looked strange but tasted like revelation. The tartness of the tomatoes balanced beautifully against the spice, creating a dessert both unexpected and irresistible. Green tomato pie turned survival into surprise, using what was left to make what was loved. Families served it proudly, knowing it told a story of ingenuity and heart. It was the kind of recipe whispered between neighbors, passed down without written words, but with quiet reverence. The first bite confused the tongue, part apple, part citrus, all comfort. It was a lesson in gratitude and creativity, a reminder that scarcity could still yield wonder. Green tomato pie was the art of making do and doing it beautifully. Molasses pie was the dark sweetness of endurance baked into a crust. When sugar was rare and luxury was far away, molasses, thick, rich, and smoky, became the backbone of Southern desserts. Families used sorghum or blackstrap, whisking it into eggs, flour, and a touch of milk until it baked into a filling that shimmered like old amber. Each slice was deep with flavor, part caramel, part earth, and part memory. It was a pie that didn't need frills or fruit, just time and faith that it would set right. The smell filled cabins and farmhouses with the scent of something sweet earned through hard work. Molasses pie reminded people of their connection to the land, to the cane fields, to the soil that gave both hardship and life. It was a dessert made to last, rich enough to feel like celebration even in times of scarcity. For many Black families in the South, it became a holiday standard, eaten slowly with coffee or milk, enjoyed long after supper had ended. Molasses pie was the kind of comfort that did not fade quickly, a flavor that stayed long after the last bite, heavy with history and warmth. Apple cider vinegar pie carried the taste of autumn long after apples were gone. When the barrels were empty and fruit was too costly, vinegar stood in for the tang of cider. Mixed with syrup, butter, and flour, it baked into a custard smooth as caramel with a bright, lingering bite. It fooled guests into thinking apples had been used, and even after they learned the truth, they kept asking for seconds. The pie was humble in appearance but full of warmth, the kind that pulled families close around the table. It spoke of making do without complaint, of turning what was sour into something worth savoring. Apple cider vinegar pie was a quiet masterpiece of survival, tart, golden, and honest. Its sweetness came not from sugar alone, but from gratitude, patience, and the hands that refused to waste a thing. Bean pie carried history in every smooth, spiced bite. Made famous through the Nation of Islam in the mid-20th century, it turned mashed navy beans into something sacred. The beans, pureed with butter, sugar, nutmeg, and vanilla, baked into a golden custard with an aroma as comforting as it was unexpected. Bean pie was never just dessert, it was nourishment for both body and spirit, a symbol of pride, discipline, and community. Street vendors and bakers across cities like Chicago and Detroit sold them warm, their flaky crusts cradling a legacy of resilience. It was a sweet that represented change, from struggle to self-sufficiency, from scarcity to creation. The pie tasted faintly of cinnamon, caramel, and memory. And though it was humble in ingredients, it carried the weight of cultural renewal. Families passed the recipe down quietly, often without writing it, keeping the balance of beans and spice in their hearts instead of books. Bean pie was a dessert of devotion, a reminder that the simplest foods could still feed the soul. It stood as both comfort and cause, still baked today as a living link to faith, freedom, and perseverance. Blackberry hand pies were the taste of summer caught between crusts. Children and grandparents picked the berries along fences and forest edges, their fingers stained purple by sunset. The filling bubbled with sugar and wild fruit, wrapped in lard pastry that fried crisp and golden in cast-iron pans. These pies were small enough to hold, perfect for workers in the fields or travelers on long roads. Each bite was sweet and sharp, full of thorns and sunlight, proof that nature still gave freely. Blackberries did not need tending, they just needed gathering, and that made these pies a blessing. They cooled on windowsills, wrapped in cloth, and disappeared before morning. Blackberry hand pies were love-made portable, dessert for people who could not afford rest but still found joy in a handful of dough and fruit. They were the South's sweetest rebellion against hunger. Lemon buttermilk pie was sunshine baked in hard times. When citrus was rare and milk went sour faster than it could be used, cooks made something magical out of what they had. The buttermilk's tang met the sharpness of lemon, blending into a custard so bright it cut through the heaviness of life in the Jim Crow South. The crust crackled under a golden top, the scent rising like hope from the oven. This was dessert born from patience and persistence, a balance of tart and sweet that reminded families that joy was still possible. Lemon buttermilk pie became a Sunday treat, a special occasion dish that made even small kitchens feel grand. It carried the taste of freedom in its lightness, as if one bite could wash away the week's burdens. Simple ingredients, honest work, and faith turned something sour into something shining. Lemon buttermilk pie was proof that resilience could be sweet, even when the world was bitter. Potato custard pie was the gentler cousin of sweet potato pie, smooth as velvet and softly spiced. It was often made when yams were scarce or too costly, using humble white potatoes that transformed under Grandma's steady hand. The secret was in the slow simmering, boiled, mashed, and folded with eggs, milk, and nutmeg until it tasted richer than it had any right to. Its sweetness was light, less bold than its yam-made cousin, but its comfort ran deep. On cool Sunday afternoons or Christmas evenings, that pie came out warm from the oven, its custard trembling just a little, the scent of cinnamon and baked crust filling every corner of the house. It was the taste of making do, of turning little into enough, of stretching blessings without complaint. Some called it poor man's pie, but in those kitchens it was simply love in a crust. The texture was soft as memory, melting on the tongue with a sweetness that lingered. Families would slice it in silence at first, savoring that moment of peace before laughter returned. It was humble, yes, but it carried pride, a pie made not from plenty, but from faith in what could be created with care. Pineapple upside-down cake was pure Sunday sunshine baked in a skillet. Mama would melt butter and brown sugar first, letting it bubble just enough to coat the bottom before laying perfect golden rings of pineapple in place. A bright red cherry sat in the center of each ring, like jewels in a crown. The batter poured on top was thick and sweet, sealing the fruit in a sugary glaze that caramelized as it baked. When it flipped out of the pan, everyone held their breath until it landed, glistening, golden, and smelling like heaven. The cake was soft and airy, the fruit sticky and rich, a dance of sweet and tart that no one could resist. Served warm with a dollop of cream, it was the definition of show-stopping simplicity. You could taste the pride in every bite, proof that beauty could rise out of everyday things. Pineapple upside-down cake was more than dessert. It was an event. Families made it to celebrate, to impress, or simply to make Sunday feel extra sweet. The first slice always drew applause, the last one, quiet sighs. It was the kind of dessert that made an ordinary meal feel like a moment worth remembering. Sweet potato custard pie was the gentler cousin of the famous sweet potato pie, softer, silkier, and quieter in its sweetness. The filling was made from freshly mashed sweet potatoes, rich farm eggs, sugar, milk, and a whisper of nutmeg. Slow baking turned it into something that barely held its shape, trembling with warmth and memory. The flavor was delicate but deep, caramel, vanilla, and earth all in harmony. Sweet potato custard pie was the dessert of holidays, revivals, and reunions, its orange glow bright as autumn sunlight. It reminded people of family kitchens filled with chatter, of gardens where the roots came from, of hands that stirred without measuring. Every spoonful carried the taste of love turned practical, nothing wasted, everything treasured. It was a pie that spoke of the land, of patience, and of the people who made sweetness out of endurance. For many, it was the first dessert they learned to bake and the last one they ever forgot. Sweet potato custard pie was heritage made edible, tender, golden, and rooted in resilience. Cornmeal crust blackberry pie was the kind of dessert that came from field and memory alike. It had the sturdy heart of a cobbler, but the formality of a pie, baked in cast iron with coarse cornmeal giving its crust a rustic crunch. Blackberries, wild and stubborn, were gathered from fence lines and forest edges, their juice staining palms purple. When mixed with sugar and spooned into that golden crust, they bubbled up like dark jewels, thick and fragrant. Each bite crackled slightly, the cornmeal adding grit and grit adding soul. This pie tasted of labor and laughter, of barefoot summers and calloused hands. It was never perfect, but it was always right, rich, tart, and rooted in the land itself. The crust browned deeply, the edges crisped just enough to break beneath the fork with a satisfying snap. The berries left trails of violet syrup across the plate, too beautiful to waste. It was the flavor of homegrown joy, of freedom baked into sweetness. Old Southern tea cake loaf was the soft, tender slice elders brought out when someone knocked on the door without warning. It was not a cookie like people imagine today, but a pale loaf flavored with vanilla, nutmeg, or lemon, baked for the purpose of hospitality itself. In many African American homes, it sat wrapped in wax paper because you never knew when a neighbor or cousin might stop by. It did not need frosting because the comfort lived in the crumb, in the way it broke gently beside a cup of tea or coffee. Older women baked it on quiet afternoons, humming while the kitchen filled with the smell of butter and sugar warming together. Children knew the first slice went to guests, but they waited for the end pieces, soft and sweet with extra browning. As visits became planned and store-bought desserts replaced homemade ones, this simple loaf faded. Younger generations forgot how one cake on the counter could open the door to conversation and connection. Today, it appears mostly in stories from elders who remember kitchens that always smelled warm and welcoming. Yet one bite is still enough to bring back low voices talking in the next room, coffee brewing on the stove, and a home that stayed ready to open its door. Lady Baltimore cake was refined white cake with elaborate fig and nut filling that African American bakers prepared for the most elegant occasions. The cake featured fluffy white layers with filling of chopped figs, raisins, pecans, and sometimes candied cherries, all bound in fluffy frosting. This was showpiece baking, demanding skill and patience. The filling needed careful preparation, with dried fruits soaked until plump and nuts toasted to enhance flavor. African American women made Lady Baltimore cake for weddings, church anniversaries, and celebrations honoring important guests, marking accomplished bakers as those with real mastery. The white frosting outside was typically 7-minute frosting, light and fluffy. Slicing revealed jewel-toned filling against pristine white cake, creating visual drama. The combination of textures made each bite interesting. Today, Lady Baltimore cake has largely disappeared, its complexity abandoned for simpler desserts. Cane syrup pie was as thick and sweet as the Louisiana air. The syrup, pressed from sugarcane fields worked by hand, gave the filling its deep amber glow. Mixed with eggs, butter, and a touch of spice, it baked into a glossy, heavy custard that clung to the fork like honey. One slice filled you up, body and spirit both. The flavor was bold, smoky, and rooted in the land itself. Cane syrup pie told the story of workers who grew sweetness from sweat, of families who turned labor into comfort. It was a pie that demanded patience, slow to pour, slow to bake, and worth every minute. On holidays, it took the center of the table, rich as gold. Cane syrup pie was the South's sweetest victory, proof that joy could still rise from the soil. Oatmeal pie was a thrifty answer to shortages, especially when pecans were too expensive for families to afford. African American cooks blended oats with sugar, eggs, and syrup, baking it into a pie that looked and tasted surprisingly close to pecan pie. The oats gave texture, while the syrup created a sweet, gooey filling beneath a golden crust. Families valued it because it allowed them to enjoy something rich and festive without the cost of nuts. Oatmeal pie was often baked for holidays or Sunday dinners, where it satisfied cravings for indulgence on a modest budget. It was also proof of kitchen ingenuity, showing how substitutes could create new traditions. The pie became tied to resourcefulness, reminding families that celebration did not depend on luxury. Served warm, it was comforting and filling, its sweetness softened by the heartiness of oats. Today it has slipped into obscurity, yet it remains a clever reminder of how African American households created joy even in the hardest times. Butter rum pound cake was the cozy winter gift passed from neighbor to neighbor when the cold settled in and holidays drew near. It was a golden cake infused with butter, sugar, and a splash of rum flavoring that made the whole house smell like warmth. African American families baked it as a gesture of care, wrapping slices in foil and delivering them to friends, church elders, or anyone who needed a little seasonal cheer. The cake baked dense and smooth, with a delicate rum glaze poured over the top while still warm. It felt festive without being showy, sweet without being overwhelming, and welcoming in a way only homemade cakes can be. Children knew this was a grown folks' cake, meant for company, not for running in and out of the kitchen grabbing pieces. Over the years, as neighborhoods changed and door-to-door visiting became less common, the tradition of gifting pound cakes softened. Store-bought treats took their place, and butter rum pound cake faded into memory. But anyone who has tasted its buttery sweetness knows it carries the quiet magic of community and care. War cake emerged during World War I and II when rationing made traditional baking nearly impossible. Yet African-American families found ways to create celebration anyway. The cake used no eggs, butter, or milk, all rationed items, yet still produced moist, spiced cake through careful chemistry. Raisins boiled with water, sugar, and spices created the base, with flour and baking soda added after cooling. The result was dark, dense cake similar to fruit cake but less rich. War cake represented patriotic sacrifice and creative resilience during national crisis. African-American women shared this recipe widely, helping neighbors maintain tradition despite shortages. The cake improved with age, actually better after a few days as flavors melded. Some added nuts when available, though they too were scarce. War cake appeared at gatherings throughout both wars, symbol of making do and carrying on. Today, war cake has disappeared along with memories of those hardships. Pineapple meringue pie was the dream of abundance after years of none. Canned pineapple, a wartime import turned treasure, gave the custard its bright tropical taste and brought sunshine to tables that had long gone without. A cloud of whipped egg whites crowned it, browned gently under the broiler until it glistened like sugar glass. It looked like something from a hotel dining room, yet it was made from the simplest of rations, a luxury born from thrift. For Black families across the South, it became a Sunday centerpiece, served with pride and reverence, a symbol of how far they had come through struggle. The flavor was sweet, light, and golden, tasting of celebration more than sustenance. Pineapple meringue pie carried the taste of hope disguised as elegance, a reminder that joy could rise even from the plainest pantry. Children would wait for it to cool, sneaking spoons of filling when no one was watching, tasting the future in each bite. Every slice shimmered with gratitude, with triumph over scarcity. It was a pie that made hardship pause, if only for a meal, and reminded everyone that sweetness, when shared, was the purest kind of victory. Muscle shoals. Lemon icebox pie was sunshine caught in a dish. Down in Alabama kitchens, where summers stretched long and fans spun slow, that chilled pie was a kind of salvation. It was made with sweetened condensed milk, fresh lemons squeezed till your hands smelled like brightness, and a graham cracker crust pressed with the back of a spoon. Iceboxes hummed in porches and pantries, keeping this tart treasure cool for Sunday dinners. The filling was smooth, tangy, and cool against the tongue, like the first breath of air after a storm. No oven, no fuss, just Southern grace in every slice. It was the dessert that waited quietly while families sang, prayed, and laughed through the heat, its chill promising comfort after long days of labor. The first bite was always the same, eyes closed, smile wide, heart at peace. The lemon scent lingered long after the pie was gone, sharp but soothing, like sunlight filtered through lace curtains. That balance of sweet and sour mirrored life itself, bright, fleeting, but always worth savoring. Sock-it-to-me cake was the bright, bold spirit of 1970s Black kitchens, a cake that made people smile before they even cut into it. It had a cinnamon and brown sugar swirl running through the middle, a playful surprise in a world of plain desserts. Families brought it to reunions and Sunday dinners because it was dependable, tender, and joyful. The glaze on top was simple, but gave the cake a shine that made it feel special. Children loved the swirl, adults loved how well it fed a crowd, and everyone loved how quickly it disappeared. It came from a time when home bakers mixed boxed cake bases with homemade fillings, creating something new without losing tradition. But as tastes changed, this cheerful cake slowly vanished from holiday tables. people forgot the pleasure of slicing into that ribbon of sweetness. Still, for anyone who remembers the 1970s, one look at that swirl brings back kitchens filled with laughter and radio music. Fig preserve cake transformed summer canning labor into special winter dessert, using preserved figs for moist, fragrant cake. African-American families grew fig trees, harvesting fruit at peak ripeness and cooking it with sugar into thick preserves. These were stirred into batter with warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. The figs provided natural sweetness and moisture, making cake incredibly tender and keeping well for days. The cake was dense but not heavy, with fig pieces providing flavor bursts. African-American bakers made it during winter holidays when fresh fruit was scarce, but pantries held summer's preserved bounty. The cake needed no frosting, just powdered sugar, letting figs shine. Some families added black walnuts or pecans for crunch. Making fig preserve cake showed off both preserve quality and baker's skill. It appeared at Christmas tables and church socials. Today, as fewer families preserve figs, the cake has nearly vanished. Raisin chess pie was a way to make luxury out of what came cheap. Dried raisins, bought in bulk or traded in town, stretched a few eggs and sugar into something that tasted rich. The raisins melted slightly as the custard baked, leaving soft bursts of sweetness in every slice. It was a dessert that made the ordinary feel like a feast, its golden top cracking under the first warm bite. Families served it after church, proud to offer something sweet even in lean months. Raisin chess pie was proof that thrift and love could make anything taste better. It turned scarcity into celebration, each piece a reminder that dessert was never about what you had, but how you used it. The flavor lingered like memory itself, humble, warm, and deeply Southern. Shoofly pie was a molasses-rich dessert that entered African-American kitchens through Southern foodways and quickly became part of tradition. Its filling of molasses, brown sugar, and crumbs baked into a dense, sweet custard that carried both depth and energy. Molasses was affordable and widely available, making the pie a practical treat for families with limited means. The flavor was bold, not delicate, with a strong sweetness balanced by the crumb topping that baked into a crisp layer. Shoofly pie was often served in thick slices with coffee, making it a favorite for gatherings or late afternoon treats. Families appreciated it not only for its taste but also for its thrift, since molasses stretched further than refined sugar. Over time, it became less common as tastes shifted and store-bought desserts took over. Yet for those who remember it, Shoofly pie is tied to memory and heritage, carrying the richness of the past in every bite. It remains one of those clever recipes that deserves to be remembered. Sock-it-to-me cake became a phenomenon in the 1960s, its playful name reflecting the era's cultural expressions and buttery richness making it coveted. The cake featured butter base swirled with cinnamon, brown sugar, and pecans, topped with vanilla glaze that dripped in glossy ribbons. The name likely came from Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, where the phrase became catchphrase. African-American bakers embraced it for church potlucks and reunions where its dramatic swirl pattern stood out. Preparation required folding, filling carefully without overmixing, creating distinct ribbons. Some families added chocolate chips or extra cinnamon. The cake stayed moist for days, practical for busy households. Children loved the sweet crunch, often requesting corner pieces. Sock-it-to-me cake represented when African-American baking intersected with popular culture. Today, its cultural moment has passed, leaving it mostly forgotten. Coconut custard pie was the taste of coastal celebration, sweet and fragrant with the scent of the sea. Made from grated coconut, fresh or canned, mixed into eggs, milk, and sugar, it baked into a custard so rich it glistened under its toasted top. Every bite was creamy and lush, carrying hints of vanilla and salt air. For many Black families in the Carolinas and along the Gulf, it was the taste of homecomings, of fish fries and Sunday gatherings where laughter filled the air. Coconut custard pie was both indulgence and memory, the kind of dessert that made ordinary days feel like occasions. It traveled well, sat beautifully on a table, and lasted just long enough for everyone to get a slice. It was proof that joy could be baked and comfort could be shared. Coconut custard pie was hospitality in its purest form, generous, golden, and filled with warmth that never truly fades. Cane syrup pie was as thick and sweet as the Louisiana air. The syrup, pressed from sugarcane fields worked by hand, gave the filling its deep amber glow. Mixed with eggs, butter, and a touch of spice, it baked into a glossy, heavy custard that clung to the fork like honey. One slice filled you up, body and spirit both. The flavor was bold, smoky, and rooted in the land itself. Cane syrup pie told the story of workers who grew sweetness from sweat, of families who turned labor into comfort. It was a pie that demanded patience, slow to pour, slow to bake, and worth every minute. On holidays, it took the center of the table, rich as gold. Cane syrup pie was the South's sweetest victory, proof that joy could still rise from the soil. Blackberry roll was summer treasure that captured fresh berry season in tender cake rolled around fruit filling, creating impressive jelly roll variation. The cake was thin sponge cake baked in sheet pan, then filled while warm with sweetened blackberries and rolled carefully into spiral. African American families made blackberry roll when berries were abundant and needed using quickly. The berries were crushed slightly with sugar, creating jammy filling that soaked into tender cake. Some versions included whipped cream in the filling, while others kept it simple with just fruit. The roll was dusted with powdered sugar outside, creating elegant presentation. Children loved the spiral pattern revealed when sliced, each piece showing purple berry swirl. The cake appeared at church socials and summer celebrations when blackberries defined the season. Today, jelly rolls remain known, but the specific blackberry version tied to summer foraging has largely disappeared. Prune cake was a thrifty dessert that turned what many considered a humble ingredient into something rich and satisfying. African American families stewed prunes until soft, then blended them into a spiced cake batter filled with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. The prunes gave the cake a deep sweetness and moist texture that lasted for days, making it perfect for large households or gatherings. It was served plain or dusted with powdered sugar, sometimes with a drizzle of simple icing when resources allowed. Prune cake was practical because prunes kept well in pantries and were affordable compared to fresh fruit. Families valued it not just for thrift but also for comfort, since its flavor carried warmth and familiarity. It was often baked during holidays or shared at church events, where its rich aroma filled kitchens with anticipation. Today, the cake is rarely seen, dismissed unfairly by modern tastes. Yet it was once beloved, a reminder that clever cooks could transform simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Prune cake stood as proof that desserts were about heart as much as luxury. Sour cream and brown sugar pie was a dessert born from thrift, but remembered for grace, turning what was nearly wasted into something deeply comforting. When the cream soured and could no longer be poured into coffee or stirred into soups, resourceful hands found a sweeter use for it. Mixed with brown sugar, butter, and eggs, it baked into a soft, caramel-scented custard with a tang that surprised the tongue and soothed the spirit. Its flavor was rich but never heavy, walking that perfect line between sweet and tart, like something elegant made from scraps. The top browned gently in the oven while the center stayed trembling and tender, so smooth it almost melted under the fork. It was served warm after long days of labor or saved for Sunday, when families could finally rest together. Every bite carried gratitude, proof that imperfection could still yield beauty. Sour cream and brown sugar pie reminded those who ate it that even what had turned could be transformed, that nothing was ever too far gone to be redeemed. It was a pie that forgave and comforted in equal measure, sweetening hardship with grace. Coconut sheet cake was the snowy, tender celebration cake that marked Easter, Christmas, and any Sunday when the whole family filled the house. Fresh grated coconut gave it a softness and smell that no bagged version can match, and older women took pride in the time it took to shred every piece by hand. The cake baked light and pale, then cooled beneath a blanket of frosting that held the coconut like the first snowfall of the year. Families cut it into squares and served it on paper plates after church services, reunions, or holidays that stretched late into the afternoon. But fresh coconut was work, real work, and as shortcuts filled the grocery aisles, the old version disappeared. Today, most people have only tasted the boxed version, but those who remember the real one can still feel the cool sweetness and hear the scrape of a coconut being cracked open on the kitchen counter. The flavor was sweet, light, and golden, tasting of celebration more than sustenance. Pineapple meringue pie carried the taste of hope disguised as elegance, a reminder that joy could rise even from the plainest pantry. Children would wait for it to cool, sneaking spoons of filling when no one was watching, tasting the future in each bite. Every slice shimmered with gratitude, with triumph over scarcity. It was a pie that made hardship pause, if only for a meal, and reminded everyone that sweetness, when shared, was the purest kind of victory. Butterscotch cake brought warm, buttery flavor through brown sugar and butter, creating distinctive taste that African American families cherished for special occasions. The cake used brown sugar exclusively, giving it deeper molasses notes than white sugar cakes. Some versions included butterscotch chips or syrup, intensifying the flavor. The frosting was typically butterscotch too, made by cooking brown sugar and butter together until thick, then beating in powdered sugar. The result was rich, sweet, and deeply satisfying, with caramel undertones throughout. African American bakers made butterscotch cake for birthdays, holidays, and church gatherings where something different from chocolate or vanilla was desired. The cake's golden brown color looked beautiful, and its flavor appealed to both children and adults. Some families added pecans or walnuts to the batter. Today, butterscotch has fallen out of favor, and butterscotch cake has become rare. Texas sheet cake was the one-pan wonder that fed entire church crowds without ever looking complicated. Baked thin in a large pan, poured with warm chocolate icing while still hot, it created a glossy top that cracked slightly as it cooled. Families carried it to potlucks, picnics, and homecomings because it sliced clean and stretched far. It was the cake you made when you needed something dependable, something that tasted rich but never felt heavy. Children remembered the warm icing dripping down the sides of the pan. Adults remembered how one cake could feed 30 people. Yet as gatherings changed and dessert tables grew more elaborate, Texas sheet cake drifted off the holiday menus. But anyone who grew up with it can still close their eyes and remember the taste, soft, chocolatey, and shared with a room full of people you loved. Buttermilk pie was a simple yet rich creation that became a fixture at family gatherings and Sunday dinners. Made from basic staples like eggs, sugar, butter, and tangy buttermilk, it baked into a creamy custard filling with a lightly golden crust. African American households valued it for its reliability, since the ingredients were nearly always available in the pantry or fridge. The flavor was balanced, slightly tart, but mostly sweet, with a smooth texture that seemed fancier than its humble origins. Grandmothers often pulled one from the oven just before guests arrived, letting it cool on the table to signal celebration. Each family had their own small twist, sometimes adding lemon zest, nutmeg, or vanilla to deepen the flavor. Buttermilk pie was also practical because it kept well, allowing leftovers to be enjoyed for days. Served warm or chilled, it always carried a sense of comfort and tradition. Today, it has been overshadowed by flashier desserts, but its quiet richness tells the story of kitchens where love and thrift created something enduring. Coca-Cola cake emerged during the 1950s when the soft drink company promoted recipes, and African American bakers adopted it for moisture and unique flavor. The cake included Coca-Cola in batter and frosting, creating subtle cola taste working with chocolate. The soda's acidity produced tender crumb, while carbonation added lightness. African American households embraced it for church potlucks where something different was needed. The recipe was practical since most families had Coke on hand. Chocolate frosting was poured hot over warm cake, soaking in slightly for glossy finish. Some added marshmallows to batter, which melted, creating sweetness pockets. Others included pecans in frosting for texture. Children loved the soda novelty, while adults appreciated moisture lasting days. The cake became popular at summer gatherings when its beverage association felt appropriate. Today, while the recipe circulates, it's rarely baked. Vinegar pie was a dessert born out of struggle but remembered for its grace. When lemons disappeared from store shelves and money ran dry, Southern cooks turned to vinegar to bring that same sharp brightness. Mixed with eggs, sugar, and butter, it baked into a silky, amber-tinted custard that fooled the tongue and comforted the soul. The pie smelled like caramel and spice, its first bite tangy enough to wake you, its aftertaste warm and deep enough to soothe you. It was a trick of survival and sweetness, the kind of cleverness that came naturally to those who had to make plenty out of little. Vinegar pie taught families that resourcefulness was its own kind of beauty. It graced tables at church suppers, funerals, and holidays alike, standing proudly among richer dishes. Each slice carried a story of a grandmother who refused to go without dessert, no matter how lean the year. It was more than pie. It was proof that hope could be baked, shared, and savored. Vinegar pie was the taste of hard times, softened by love, tart enough to remember, sweet enough to last. Molasses stacked cake graced weddings and homecomings with a sweetness born of patience and skill. Thin layers of spiced cake were baked individually, then stacked high with a rich molasses filling that soaked into the crumb as the dessert rested overnight. The dark syrup lent a deep flavor that spoke of both Caribbean cane fields and Southern kitchens. Families often baked the layers days ahead, turning the assembly into a festive gathering where aunts and cousins worked side by side. Each slice told a story of celebration and endurance, for molasses was affordable and plentiful even when other sweeteners were scarce. The cake's tall, impressive stature made it a centerpiece on tables decorated for special occasions, a symbol of abundance even in lean times. Today, few households take the time to roll, bake, and stack so many delicate layers, and the recipe lives mostly in old family cookbooks. Those who have tasted it know the quiet triumph of a dessert that rewards effort with lasting memory. Vinegar pie was one of those clever creations born out of necessity, especially during the Depression when ingredients like lemons were hard to find. African-American families embraced it as a way to create something sweet and tangy when the pantry seemed bare. The filling used simple staples: sugar, butter, eggs, and a splash of vinegar to mimic the tartness of fruit pies. Baked in a flaky crust, the result was a custard-like dessert with a surprising flavor that balanced richness with tang. It became a common treat at Sunday tables and special occasions, showing how creativity could transform scarcity into something memorable. The pie symbolized resilience, proving that a lack of fancy ingredients did not mean going without dessert. It was also a way of teaching younger generations about resourcefulness, turning what little you had into something worth sharing. Though many people today may raise eyebrows at the thought of vinegar in a pie, those who remember it know it carried warmth and pride. It was not just about taste, but about making the best of hard times. Few pies capture that kind of story anymore, which makes vinegar pie truly unforgettable. 7-Up cake was the bright, lemony potluck star of the 1960s and 1970s, the kind of cake you could spot across a crowded church basement just by its golden glow. The soda kept it tender, light, and fragrant, making each bite feel airy but rich at the same time. Mothers baked it because it never failed, because it sliced clean, and because it made the whole house smell like sunshine on a warm afternoon. Some people glazed it with lemon icing, others left it plain. But either way, it was a celebration cake, a cake you brought when you wanted to brighten a room. Children loved the sweetness, adults loved the moisture, and everyone loved that it tasted just as good on day 2 as it did fresh from the oven. But as new dessert trends arrived and soda cakes fell out of fashion, 7-Up cake slowly drifted off the table. Store-bought desserts replaced the homemade ones, and the simple genius of soda-based baking slipped quietly into history. Still, anyone who grew up with it never forgot the first bite, soft and citrusy and impossibly tender, like a little piece of childhood wrapped in foil. Jam cake was Depression-era resourcefulness that stretched precious ingredients by using homemade preserves as both flavor and moisture, creating cakes that carried summer fruits into winter celebrations. The preserves were stirred directly into batter, usually blackberry or strawberry, providing sweetness while reducing sugar needs. African-American families made jam cake during holidays when something special was expected, but money remained tight. The fruit pieces created texture, while spices like cinnamon and nutmeg complemented berry flavor. The cake stayed remarkably moist thanks to preserves, often improving after a day. Some bakers added black walnuts or pecans when available. The cake needed minimal frosting since jam provided richness. Making jam cake showed kitchen wisdom, demonstrating how to create celebration from stored goods. Today, with commercial jams replacing homemade preserves, traditional jam cake has largely disappeared. Pumpkin molasses. Pie was the deep, spiced heart of the harvest table. Pumpkins were mashed soft, mixed with molasses, and scented with cloves, cinnamon, and ginger. The molasses gave it a darker sweetness than sugar ever could, heavy with the echo of African fields and southern farms. It was a pie that spoke across generations, carrying flavors that tied freedom and survival together. The filling shimmered like bronze under the oven light, and its smell filled the air with warmth that felt almost sacred. Pumpkin molasses pie was eaten slowly, reverently, with thanks for the land and the labor that made it. It was both food and remembrance, a story baked into every slice. Sweet, earthy, and spiced with soul, it was more than dessert. It was heritage. Pineapple meringue pie was the dream of abundance after years of none. Canned pineapple, a wartime import turned treasure, gave the custard its bright tropical taste and brought sunshine to tables that had long gone without. A cloud of whipped egg whites crowned it, browned gently under the broiler until it glistened like sugar glass. It looked like something from a hotel dining room, yet it was made from the simplest of rations, a luxury born from thrift. For Black families across the South, it became a Sunday centerpiece, served with pride and reverence, a symbol of how far they had come through struggle. Hot milk sponge cake was the quiet, airy dessert that older grandmothers baked long before anyone relied on boxed mixes to do the work. The warm milk folded into the batter created a softness that felt almost weightless, a cake so gentle it barely needed frosting. Families served it with berries, whipped cream, or just powdered sugar dusted lightly on top. It was the dessert you made when you wanted something delicate but not too sweet, something that felt homemade without shouting for attention. As baking trends shifted toward richer and heavier desserts, this tender sponge cake faded. People forgot how satisfying a light cake could be, how its simplicity made room for conversation and company. Yet in the quiet kitchens where older women still measure by instinct, hot milk sponge cake lives on like a whispered tradition. Applesauce cake was wartime necessity that became beloved tradition, using applesauce to replace eggs and butter when rationing made those ingredients scarce. The applesauce provided moisture, binding, and subtle sweetness, creating surprisingly good cake from limited pantry. African-American families embraced it during World War II and continued making it afterward because it genuinely tasted good. The cake was spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, complementing the apple flavor while adding warmth. Raisins were often folded in, their sweetness enhanced by spices. The texture was dense and moist, similar to fruitcake but lighter. Some bakers added nuts when available. The cake kept well, improving after a day as flavors melded. It appeared at church gatherings and packed lunches where its durability made it practical. Applesauce cake represented resilience during shortage, proving that limitation could inspire deliciousness. Today, the tradition has faded, despite its goodness. Sweet onion pie was a dish that never quite fit in but never disappeared either. It started as a necessity when onions were cheap and meat was not. The onions were sliced thin, caramelized slowly in butter, and baked into a pie shell with sugar, cream, and a whisper of spice. The flavor was both sweet and savory, confusing the tongue but comforting the heart. Families ate it warm, Not as dessert or dinner, but as something in between. A dish that filled the space where food and memory met. Sweet onion pie told the story of ingenuity, of using what the earth gave even when it seemed too plain to please. Its aroma was rich and deep, the kind that made a house feel alive again. It was a strange pie, but a brave one, born of those who dared to mix the unexpected and find beauty in it. Coconut custard pie was once a staple at church potlucks and family reunions, where its creamy texture and tropical flavor stood out among other desserts. African-American cooks blended eggs, milk, sugar, and shredded coconut to make a custard filling that baked into a golden, fragrant pie. The coconut added both sweetness and texture, turning a simple custard into something memorable. It was often served in generous slices, paired with coffee or sweet tea after a hearty meal. Coconut custard pie symbolized celebration, reminding everyone that even the simplest ingredients could feel indulgent when made with care. Families often guarded their recipes closely, adding small twists like nutmeg, lemon zest, or a splash of vanilla to make their version unique. Children often remembered it as the taste of church gatherings, where long tables were filled with home-baked desserts made with love. Today, coconut cream pies remain popular, but the custard version has nearly disappeared. Its absence leaves a quiet gap in cultural memory, even though it once stood proudly on countless tables. Coconut custard pie deserves to be remembered as one of the clever, cherished desserts no one makes anymore. Old-fashioned burnt sugar cake was the labor of love that only the most patient elders attempted, a cake whose flavor came from caramelizing sugar slowly until it reached a deep amber color. The caramel was stirred into the batter, giving the cake a warm, almost smoky sweetness that set it apart from anything else on the table, making it required attention and skill. Burn the sugar too much and it turned bitter, too little, and the flavor fell flat. Families respected the bakers who mastered it, knowing the cake represented tradition, memory, and the kind of cooking done without rushing. The frosting, often made from the same caramel base, coated the cake in a glossy layer that melted on the tongue. Over time, as people moved toward easier recipes, burnt sugar cake faded from holiday spreads. Younger bakers found it intimidating, and many never tasted the original to understand why elders loved it so fiercely. Today it survives mostly in faded notebooks and stories told across kitchen tables. But for those who remember that first bite, the flavor was unforgettable, bold, warm, and full of the past. Prune pie was the dessert of endurance, sweetened by patience and the wisdom of those who made do. Dried prunes, softened with sugar, spice, and thyme, transformed into a dark, glossy filling rich with depth. Its flavor was mellow but confident, the taste of something built to last. Families baked it when fruit was scarce, when every bit of sweetness had to be earned. It filled kitchens with the scent of molasses and comfort, reminding everyone that sweetness could still be found in hard seasons. Soldiers carried it, travelers packed it, and mothers baked it to stretch what they had. Each slice was dense and velvety, proof that time itself could turn humble ingredients into something generous. Prune pie was more than dessert. It was a promise that even what seemed dried out could bloom again. Its flavor lingered, dark and soft, a quiet echo of perseverance. In every bite was a memory of thrift turned into tradition, of survival turned into sweetness. Mahogany cake was Depression-era brilliance, using cocoa and strong coffee to create dark, rich cake when chocolate was too expensive. Coffee intensified chocolate flavor, while cocoa provided color without requiring costly chocolate bars. African-American cooks developed this during the 1930s when making something special required creativity over costly ingredients. The cake was darker than regular chocolate with deep reddish-brown mahogany color. The crumb was tight and moist, standing up to simple frostings or powdered sugar. Some added buttermilk for tang, others incorporated sour cream when available. It appeared at church socials and birthday celebrations where families wanted festive treats without breaking budgets. Children didn't realize they ate thrift recipes because it tasted rich and satisfying. Cocoa and coffee created complexity store-bought mixes couldn't match. Today, with chocolate readily available, mahogany cake has faded from kitchens. Pumpkin molasses. Pie was the deep, spiced heart of the harvest table. Pumpkins were mashed soft, mixed with molasses, and scented with cloves, cinnamon, and ginger. The molasses gave it a darker sweetness than sugar ever could, heavy with the echo of African fields and southern farms. It was a pie that spoke across generations, carrying flavors that tied freedom and survival together. The filling shimmered like bronze under the oven light, and its smell filled the air with warmth that felt almost sacred. Pumpkin molasses pie was eaten slowly, reverently, with thanks for the land and the labor that made it. It was both food and remembrance, a story baked into every slice. Sweet, earthy, and spiced with soul, it was more than dessert. It was heritage. Red velvet cake once held different meaning than today's bright red confection, originally getting color from natural chemical reactions rather than dye. The original used buttermilk and vinegar reacting with cocoa to create subtle reddish tint, a mahogany rather than vivid red. African-American bakers elevated this during the early 1900s, turning it into special occasion dessert for church anniversaries and weddings. The cake was tender and fine-crumbed with slight chocolate flavor balanced by tangy buttermilk. Traditional cream cheese frosting came later. Early versions featured ermine frosting from cooked flour and milk. The cake required precise technique. Overmixing toughened it, undermixing made it dense. African-American women passed down specific methods, teaching daughters to fold rather than stir. When food coloring became available, bakers intensified the color, eventually creating today's vivid red. The original's subtle color and delicate flavor are mostly forgotten. Evaporated milk. Icebox pie was the taste of modern relief, the reward for decades of effort and scarcity. In the 1950s, it became a symbol of progress, made not by fire, but by cool convenience, the refrigerator's hum replacing the crackle of the hearth. Evaporated milk, canned and shelf-stable, whipped into something soft and silky, a miracle of texture from the simplest pantry goods. Lemon, cocoa, or vanilla gave it character, but its soul was in its smoothness. It was light yet indulgent, a dessert that felt almost futuristic, easy to make, but full of pride. For families who had weathered the hard years, it felt like a new chapter, proof that comfort no longer had to cost struggle. Evaporated milk. Icebox pie was cool against the heat of memory, creamy against the roughness of the past. It carried the flavor of possibility, sweet, calm, and full of quiet triumph. This was not just food, but a marker of change, the taste of a world learning to breathe again. Cornmeal pie was as humble as the hands that mixed it. Made from cornmeal, milk, butter, and sugar, it straddled the line between bread and dessert, rich enough for company, but plain enough for every day. The batter baked into a golden, lightly gritty filling with a crisp crust and a smooth center. It was a pie that didn't pretend to be anything else, and that was its charm. Cornmeal pie turned a farm staple into something indulgent without waste or excess. Families ate it warm from the oven, topped with a drizzle of sorghum or a spoonful of cream if they had it. It was simple food made sacred by tradition. Cornmeal pie tasted of hearth and patience, of quiet evenings when sweetness was rare and shared sparingly. It carried the soul of the South, resourceful, honest, and proud. Every bite told a story of survival through creativity, of making do and making joy. Cornmeal pie was the dessert that didn't need celebration to matter. It was celebration enough by itself. Molasses spice cake was the warm, thrifty dessert that carried African-American families through lean years, long before sugar was cheap or bakeries were crowded with choices. Made from molasses, spices, and a little fat, it baked into something far richer than anyone expected from such simple ingredients. During the Depression and well into the 1960s, molasses was the sweetener families trusted because it was affordable and always on hand. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger turned the batter into a dark, fragrant cake that tasted like comfort and endurance. Children believed this was what holidays were meant to taste like: warm, dense, deeply flavored. Slices traveled to neighbors, church gatherings, and school lunches. But as sugar grew cheaper and new desserts became popular, molasses cake faded from view. Younger cooks dismissed it without realizing how much history lived inside that dark sweetness. Today it sits mostly in old handwritten recipes, waiting for someone to bring it back. For those who grew up with it, no modern cake replaces the steady comfort it offered during hard times. Coconut layer cake was once the pinnacle of special occasion baking in African American households, featuring tall layers coated entirely in shredded coconut that created dramatic presentation. The cake itself was tender white or yellow butter cake, but glory came from coconut covering every inch of frosting until it resembled a snowball. African American bakers made this for Easter, Christmas, weddings, and church anniversaries where visual impact mattered. The preparation was labor-intensive, baking multiple layers, making smooth frosting, then pressing shredded coconut onto every surface. Some used fresh coconut grated by hand, while others relied on packaged, sweetened coconut. The result was impressive, worthy of important celebrations. Cutting revealed pristine white layers, creating anticipation. The texture combined tender cake, creamy frosting, and coconut's unique chew. Today, coconut cakes exist, but the showpiece tradition has diminished. Cracked corn pie was the quiet triumph of the rural South, a recipe built on endurance and simplicity. Coarsely ground corn was whisked with milk, eggs, and a hint of sweetness, then baked until the custard rose golden and the edges browned crisp. The first slice cut through with a satisfying crunch before yielding to the soft, warm center beneath. It was hearty enough to feed a family, simple enough to make from almost nothing. The flavor was rustic and comforting, tasting faintly of smoke, grain, and the labor of the land itself. For Black families in the countryside, cracked corn pie carried more than nourishment. It carried pride. It told the story of those who could make beauty out of what others might discard. Served hot from the oven or cold by morning, it was food for both work and rest, both survival and joy. Each bite reminded those who ate it that sweetness could come from even the roughest kernels. Cracked corn pie was more than a meal. It was a legacy of perseverance baked into every grain. It proved that comfort, like faith, could always rise from hardship. Coconut layer cake was the grand finale of any Sunday spread, tall and proud with frosting as white as a new tablecloth. Mama cracked coconuts by hand, saving every drop of milk and shaving the meat fine with patience born of love. The layers were soft and buttery, each one stacked carefully, then covered in billows of sweet icing that clung like snow. Every forkful carried a tender sweetness, rich but never heavy, with the faint crunch of fresh coconut catching the light. It was a cake made for special days, Easter, homecomings, or when company came calling. You could taste the care in every bite, the kind that took all afternoon but felt worth every minute. Children waited by the counter for stray flakes to fall, while grown folks admired the cake like art before slicing. It was the kind of dessert that silenced a table, not out of manners but awe. Coconut layer cake was not just food, it was ceremony, celebration, and memory covered in white. Even days later, the leftovers stayed moist, the frosting soft and forgiving. A slice of it could turn any Sunday into something sacred, proof that beauty could come from nothing more than butter, sugar, and heart. Sorghum cake was rural Southern tradition that used sorghum syrup to create dark, robust cake when refined sugar was unaffordable. Sorghum had distinctive molasses-like flavor, slightly bitter but complex, that African American families valued as sweetener grown and processed locally. The syrup was stirred into batter with warm spices like ginger and cinnamon, creating cake similar to gingerbread but with sorghum's unique character. The cake was dense, moist, and deeply flavored, standing up well to time without drying. African American households made it during winter when its rich taste felt appropriate. Some served it warm with butter, while others topped it with whipped cream or simple glaze. The cake appeared at church suppers where its home-style appeal impressed guests. Making sorghum cake required understanding how the syrup's moisture affected batter. Today, as sorghum syrup has become specialty item, sorghum cake has largely disappeared from everyday baking traditions. Chocolate mayonnaise cake was the dessert that turned thrift into pure genius. Born from lean times, it replaced milk and butter with mayonnaise, adding moisture that made every bite rich and velvety. Mama would mix cocoa and sugar into the batter until it looked like silk, then pour it into pans that smelled faintly of Sunday roast. The cake rose dark and even, its texture soft as a secret. Once cooled, it got topped with thick fudge frosting, whipped by hand, shiny enough to catch the light. Nobody believed mayonnaise could make something taste that good, but one bite erased all doubt. The flavor was deep, not too sweet, with a smoothness that made you close your eyes for just a second longer. Chocolate mayonnaise cake reminded folks that creativity could taste better than luxury. It was humble, clever, and downright delicious, a symbol of how resourceful hands could turn anything into something worth celebrating. Served after Sunday dinner, it always disappeared before the coffee cooled. Every crumb carried history, heart, and a reminder that love, like good cake, needs no fancy ingredients, just faith in what you have and a reason to share it. 7-Up cake emerged during the 1960s when soft drink companies promoted creative recipe uses and African-American bakers adopted it for unusual moisture and subtle citrus notes. The lemon-lime soda replaced both liquid and leavening, creating incredibly tender pound-style cake with hint of citrus. The carbonation produced fine, even texture while the soda's acidity helped tenderize. African-American households embraced it for church potlucks and summer gatherings where its lightness felt appropriate. The cake required no frosting, just simple glaze made with powdered sugar and more 7-Up, creating glossy coating. Some bakers added lemon extract or zest to emphasize citrus, while others let the soda shine alone. The recipe was popular because most families kept soda on hand. Children found the concept clever, while adults appreciated consistently moist results. Today, 7-Up cake has faded as newer trends emerged. Chess cake squares were the dense, buttery dessert bars that filled school fundraisers, bake sales, and family events with a sweetness that stuck to your fingers. They were made from simple ingredients: cream cheese, butter, sugar, and a soft base that baked into something rich enough to satisfy a crowd. Mothers made them because they traveled well, sliced neatly, and tasted even better the next day. Children circled the table hoping to grab the corner pieces, where the edges caramelized into a golden chew. But as more modern desserts took over and school functions changed, chess cake squares slipped out of rotation. Their simplicity became overshadowed by trendier treats, and fewer people remembered how effortless and comforting they could be. Still, one bite of that sweet, creamy top layer can take you right back to a cafeteria filled with laughter and folding chairs. Molasses ginger cake was a winter staple that combined robust molasses with sharp ginger, creating warm, spicy cake perfect for cold months. The molasses provided both sweetness and moisture, while ginger, fresh or dried, added heat and complexity. African-American families made this cake during fall and winter, when its dark richness felt appropriate. The cake was typically baked in square pan and served warm with butter or topped with lemon sauce that balanced the molasses' heaviness. Some versions included chopped crystallized ginger for extra bite. The cake improved after sitting as flavors intensified and texture softened. African-American households served molasses ginger cake at holiday gatherings and church suppers where its warming spices welcomed guests. The aroma-filling kitchens announced comfort and tradition. Children often found it too strong at first, but grew to love it. Today, while gingerbread remains popular, the specific molasses ginger cake tradition has faded, replaced by milder versions. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Buttermilk spice cake was once a kitchen staple that turned simple pantry ingredients into fragrant celebration, using tangy buttermilk to create tender crumb, while warm spices filled homes with comfort. The cake combined cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and sometimes allspice with buttermilk that reacted with baking soda to produce light texture. African American bakers made this during fall and winter when spice cakes felt appropriate. The cake was moist enough to last days without drying, making it practical for weekly baking. Some added raisins or dates for sweetness, while others kept it plain to showcase spices. The cake appeared at church gatherings and afternoon teas where its aroma announced something homemade. Frosting was optional. Many served it plain with coffee or powdered sugar. Today, spice cakes remain known, but the buttermilk version has faded as commercial mixes replaced from-scratch baking. Black walnut cake was the deep, earthy holiday treasure elders guarded like something sacred. Black walnuts were hard to crack, hard to clean, and their flavor was bold in a way nothing else could mimic. That difficulty made the cake feel special, almost ceremonial, especially in winter when families gathered in warm, crowded kitchens. Many African American households saved it for Christmas because preparing the nuts took real time and real patience. Children helped crack shells on porches while older relatives sifted out the tiny pieces inside. The cake baked into a rich, smoky sweetness that store-bought desserts never touched, a flavor tied to laughter and tradition. But as black walnuts became scarce and expensive, families stopped baking it, and younger generations never understood the difference regular walnuts could not make up for. Now the true version is rare, kept alive mostly by older cooks in rural towns. Yet anyone who remembers it can still summon the taste, a flavor as proud and irreplaceable as the people who once made it by hand. Marmalade cake used citrus preserves to create bright, tangy cake that showcased African American bakers' ability to transform pantry staples into special desserts. Orange marmalade was stirred directly into batter along with orange zest when available, creating cake with intense citrus flavor and bits of candied peel throughout. The marmalade provided both sweetness and moisture, making the cake tender and long-lasting. Some bakers added lemon marmalade or combination of citrus preserves, depending on what they had canned. The cake was typically frosted with orange glaze or simple buttercream flavored with orange juice. African American families made marmalade cake during winter, when preserved citrus brought sunshine to cold months. The cake appeared at church gatherings and family celebrations where its brightness felt cheerful. The texture included chewy bits of candied peel that added interest. Today, as homemade marmalade has become less common, marmalade cake has faded. Hummingbird cake was a dessert tied to African American gatherings in the South, combining bananas, pineapple, and spices into a moist, flavorful cake. It was generously frosted with cream cheese icing, making it rich and indulgent without being overly complicated. The fruit gave the cake natural sweetness and kept it tender, while the spices added warmth. Families served it at reunions, weddings, and Sunday dinners, where it became a centerpiece dessert that drew compliments. Hummingbird cake was often passed around in large slices, meant to be shared and enjoyed together. Its popularity soared during the mid-20th century, but over time it has quietly faded from many kitchens. Though still remembered in Southern cookbooks, it rarely appears on modern tables, overshadowed by trendier desserts. Yet those who recall it know it carried a spirit of celebration, a cake that symbolized abundance and care. Hummingbird cake remains one of those recipes that tells a story of hospitality and joy, baked with both fruit and tradition. Lemon cheesecake bore no resemblance to modern cheesecake, instead featuring layers filled with cooked lemon curd that African American bakers called lemon cheese. The curd was made from lemon juice, sugar, eggs, and butter, cooked slowly until thick and spreadable, creating intensely tart filling contrasting with sweet layers. This was labor-intensive baking requiring careful attention to prevent curdling and patience to assemble multiple layers. African American women made it for spring and summer celebrations when lemons were available and bright flavor felt appropriate. The layers were white or yellow butter cake, baked thin and tender. Some added simple buttercream outside. Others left it unfrosted to showcase lemon layers when sliced. The combination was refreshing and sophisticated. Children found the lemon too tart, but adults appreciated the balance. The cake appeared at church teas, ladies' socials, and family celebrations. Today, as lemon cheese fell out of use, the traditional cake has disappeared. Mixing pineapple, coconut, and macadamia nuts into a creamy, dreamy dessert. It layers crushed pineapple with coconut-flavored pudding and whipped topping, all on a crumbly crust. It's a favorite for gatherings where you want something easy and refreshing that screams tropical paradise. This dessert is particularly popular during the summer months, serving as a cool treat that transports eaters to the sunny shores of Hawaii with every spoonful. This dessert is usually chilled and served in squares, making it super easy to grab a piece. The combo of crunchy nuts, creamy pudding, and fruity pineapple makes every bite a mini vacation. Pink champagne cake is all about celebration. This cake uses actual champagne in the batter, which gives it a light, airy feel with a hint of bubbly. It's usually tinted pink for that gingerbread layer cake transformed simple spice cake into elegant celebration by stacking multiple layers with lemon or caramel filling between. While gingerbread typically meant single-layer sheet cake, this version showed African American bakers' ability to elevate humble recipes into something impressive. The gingerbread layers were spiced with ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, creating warm, aromatic base. The filling could be lemon curd for bright contrast or caramel for deeper richness. Some versions included whipped cream between layers, creating lighter texture. The cake appeared at holidays, especially Christmas, when gingerbread felt appropriate and festive. African American families made it for church gatherings where its height and elegance created impact. The layers needed careful baking to ensure they were sturdy enough for stacking without being dry. Today, gingerbread layer cake has largely disappeared, replaced by single-layer versions or gingerbread cookies. Carrot pineapple cake was the fruit-forward potluck powerhouse that once ruled church basements and fellowship halls. It was moist, dense, and full of grated carrots, crushed pineapple, and sometimes pecans, bound together in a batter that baked into something richer than the ingredients implied. African American families made it for large gatherings because one pan fed many people, and its flavor felt bright even in the coldest months. The cream cheese frosting was the finishing touch, smooth and tangy, spreading easily across the top. This cake traveled well, sliced neatly, and stayed moist for days, qualities any church cook valued deeply. But as grocery stores filled with bakery cakes and celebrations shifted, carrot pineapple cake faded into the background. Fewer home bakers grated carrots by hand or opened cans of pineapple just for one recipe. Yet those who remember sharing slices after long Sunday services still talk about its tender crumb and gentle sweetness. One bite tasted like fellowship, community, and a time when potluck tables stretched farther than anyone could see. German chocolate cake, despite its rich flavor and beloved status, has faced competition from newer, more fashionable desserts that cater to evolving tastes and dietary restrictions. The cake's traditional recipe, which includes a dense, sweet coconut pecan frosting, may not align with current trends toward lighter, less sugary desserts. Additionally, the misconception about its origin, it's American, not German, and the increasing preference for global flavors have also contributed to its reduced prominence in the dessert landscape. Nonetheless, German chocolate cake's decline has not erased its legacy. It remains a nostalgic favorite for many, underscoring the potential for adaptation to today's more health-conscious and flavor-diverse dessert market. The colorful and jiggly Jell-O salad once stood as a centerpiece of festivity, celebrated for its versatility and the playful splash it brought to gatherings. This dessert, or side dish, was celebrated for its versatility and festive appearance, making it a staple at gatherings. Its decline can be attributed to changing dietary preferences and an increased awareness of artificial ingredients found in many Jell-O products. The rise of whole food and natural eating trends made the gelatin-based salad, often loaded with canned fruits or vegetables and sometimes even mayonnaise or cheese, seem outdated and unappetizing. Furthermore, as culinary tastes evolved, the texture and concept of Jell-O salad became less appealing, replaced by fresher, more natural dessert options that reflected contemporary health and wellness trends. Stack cake was Appalachian tradition that African American families and mountain communities embraced, featuring thin layers stacked high with dried apple filling or preserves between each. The cake layers were more like cookies, thin and sturdy enough to support the stack's weight. Each layer was baked separately, then assembled with filling and left to rest, allowing moisture to soften the layers into cohesive cake. Some versions used dried apples cooked with molasses, creating dark, spiced filling. Others used whatever preserves were available. The resulting cake was dense and concentrated, with flavors intensifying as it sat. African American families made stack cake for weddings where guests each brought a layer, demonstrating community cooperation. The more layers, the more prosperity and good wishes. The cake also appeared at holiday celebrations where its impressive height created visual impact. Today, stack cake has become rare. Million-dollar cake was the tall, pineapple-filled refrigerator cake families saved for the biggest moments, birthdays, holidays, or the kind of gatherings where every cousin showed up at once. It was cool, creamy, and towering, a cake that felt luxurious, even though it relied on humble ingredients like crushed pineapple, whipped filling, and soft layers. The magic was not in fancy technique, but in the way the flavors melded overnight, turning simple ingredients into something that felt like celebration itself. Families passed it around at reunions, slid slices onto paper plates, and marveled at how refreshing it tasted in the hot southern months. But as times changed and refrigerator cakes lost their place to trendier desserts, million-dollar cake became rare. Fewer people remembered how the layers softened just enough, how the pineapple brought brightness, or how the cake could feed 20 people without a complaint. Today it survives mostly in handwritten recipe cards tucked inside old cookbooks, waiting for someone to remember how joyful a chilled cake can be. 1 2 3 4 cake carried its recipe in its name. 1 cup butter, 2 cups sugar, 3 cups flour, 4 eggs, creating a reliable pound cake that never failed. This mathematical simplicity meant the recipe passed down orally, taught to children learning fractions beside their grandmothers in warm kitchens. The cake was dense yet tender, with fine crumb that held under heavy icings. African American families relied on it for birthdays and church gatherings, knowing it would turn out perfectly without written instructions. Some added lemon, others vanilla. A few chose almond for special occasions. Children recited the formula like nursery rhymes, ensuring tradition continued through generations. 1 2 3 4 cake represented democratic baking, accessible to anyone who could count. Today, while pound cakes remain popular, teaching the formula as memory device has disappeared. Crepe cakes weren't as common. When they served them, it was always with style, dressed up with a little sauce or a sprinkle of powdered sugar to make them look as good as they tasted. Neapolitan ice cream sandwiches throw together classic flavors: vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry ice cream, squeezed between cookies or wafers. This treat took the old-school Neapolitan ice cream idea from Italy, where mixing up flavors was the thing, and turned it into a fun, easy-to-eat dessert. Having all those flavors in one bite made it super popular at family get-togethers and community events. It was a blast of color and taste that just felt like a party. But as the dessert scene got crowded with new, exotic flavors and gourmet options, these ice cream sandwiches didn't stand out as much. They were simple but effective, with clear layers of ice cream. Baked Alaska, once the pinnacle of dining elegance with its combination of cake, ice cream, and meringue, has faded in popularity due to its perceived complexity and the rise of simpler, more accessible desserts. The challenge of perfectly executing the meringue and achieving the flambé effect can be daunting for home bakers, contributing to its decline. Additionally, in a culinary landscape that values quick and straightforward recipes, baked Alaska's time-consuming preparation makes it less appealing for everyday dessert choices. However, its dramatic presentation and the contrast of hot and cold elements retain a potential allure, suggesting that deconstructed or simplified versions could bring it back into favor for special occasions. Old-fashioned jam cake was the spice-covered memory keeper of Southern Black families, a cake that used fruit preserves not for decoration but for survival. Before sugar was easy to buy and fresh fruit was available year-round, jam was what sweetened the batter and kept the cake moist. Its color was deep, its flavor warm with spices like cinnamon and clove, and its texture sturdy enough to wrap and travel. Families made it for holidays or long journeys, knowing it could feed many people without spoiling the tang of the jam mixed with the spices to create a flavor that felt both practical and celebratory. Grandmothers often used whatever preserves they had: blackberry, peach, fig, giving each cake a personality shaped by the land and the season. But as modern desserts overtook old ones and store-bought treats became easier, jam cake faded. Few people today know the quiet satisfaction of slicing into something sweetened by a summer harvest kept through winter. Its memory still lingers, though, in the kitchens, where frugality was always matched by creativity. Lane cake emerged from Alabama kitchens as a showpiece featuring white cake layers filled with bourbon-laced raisins, pecans, and coconut. Emma Ryder Lane created the original in the 1890s, but African-American cooks refined it for weddings and Christmas celebrations. The filling required careful cooking to avoid curdling eggs, stirring constantly until thick, then folding in dried fruits soaked in whiskey. The cake layers were tender, contrasting the rich, boozy filling. Some bakers added preserves or extra spices depending on the season. Lane cake was labor-intensive, demanding patience that marked accomplished bakers. It appeared at important celebrations where its elegance impressed guests. Today, Lane cake has faded, overshadowed by simpler confections. Yet it once represented the pinnacle of African-American baking, proving that celebration deserved something extraordinary. Extra festive touch. The cake is often layered with champagne-infused buttercream, making every slice a toast in itself. It's a popular pick for weddings and big celebrations, where its elegant look and unique flavor really shine. What makes this cake truly special is its ability to double as a celebratory toast, offering a sip of champagne in every bite. Typically, it's dressed up with fancy decorations like edible pearls or delicate frosting designs that make it just right for a special occasion. Panouche is a kind of fudge that comes from New England and packs a big caramel punch, thanks to loads of brown sugar mixed with butter, milk, and vanilla. It's different from your typical chocolate fudge because it's got this rich, molasses-like flavor and a slightly grainy texture that's really unique. Often, it's loaded with nuts like walnuts or pecan. Crêpe Suzette, featuring thin pancakes and a showy orange sauce, added a touch of French elegance to the table, impressing with its dramatic flambé performance. However, its decline in popularity can be attributed to the modern diner's preference for quicker, less intricate desserts. The preparation of crêpe Suzette, particularly the flambé technique, while theatrical, may seem intimidating to the home cook and overly elaborate for casual dining. Additionally, the shift towards lighter, health-conscious dessert options has overshadowed richer, buttery desserts. Despite this, crêpe Suzette holds potential for resurgence with adaptations that simplify the recipe without compromising its essence, catering to the contemporary interest in both gourmet home cooking and healthier, refined sweets. On an ordinary afternoon, evaporated milk gave it a smoothness regular milk could not match, a creaminess that tasted like time and care. Older women baked it for homecomings, anniversaries, and repasts, knowing a good pound cake brought comfort without needing anything extra. You did not frost it or dress it up. You just sliced it thick and served it with pride. Every family had someone known for making the best one, someone who never wrote the recipe down because the real steps lived in their hands. But as life sped up and convenience took over, evaporated milk pound cake faded from the table. Today, it appears only at the deepest family events, usually when someone older insists on bringing it back. And when it does, it reminds everyone what real comfort tastes like. Scripture cake was once a beloved tradition that turned Bible study into baking, challenging families to decode recipes written entirely in biblical verses. Judges 5:25 called for butter, Genesis 18:6 specified flour, and Jeremiah 6:20 demanded sweet cane for sugar. This wasn't just wordplay, but a teaching tool that helped children learn scripture while preparing dessert. The cake was dense and fruit-filled, similar to fruitcake, but lighter in texture. African American churches embraced it during the early 1900s, making it centerpiece of fundraisers where women demonstrated both biblical knowledge and baking skills with pride. The tradition required time, patience, and a well-worn Bible kept in the kitchen. Today, scripture cake has nearly vanished, replaced by simpler recipes. Yet for those who remember, it represented more than dessert. It was education, devotion, and community baked into every layer. Back in the late 70s, Jell-O rolled out pudding pops, turning the frozen treat game on its head with something way creamier than the usual ice pops. Made from milk, sugar, and pudding mix, these pops were all about delivering a super smooth, rich taste. At their peak, pudding pops were so popular that they spawned a range of flavors, including chocolate, vanilla, and swirls. They totally stood out, thanks in part to those catchy Bill Cosby ads shouting, "Pudding in a pop." That marketing charm made these treats a big deal in households across the board. But even with their popularity, Kraft decided to cut them from the lineup in the early 2000s. They were trying to slim down their product range. The bright, fun packaging and that quirky non-wood stick are what a lot of folks remember about them. Grasshopper pie, minty and bright, offered a refreshing departure from traditional desserts, captivating with its vibrant green hue and creamy texture. Its decline can largely be attributed to changing dessert trends that favor less artificially colored and flavored options. The rise of culinary sophistication has seen a shift towards desserts that highlight natural ingredients and artisanal craftsmanship, leaving behind those with a reliance on food coloring and pre-made mixes. Furthermore, the pie's association with retro dining trends makes it less appealing in a market that constantly seeks the next innovative dessert. Despite this, grasshopper pie's unique flavor profile and potential for a more natural ingredient-based revival could reintroduce it to a new audience looking for a blend of nostalgia and modernity. Banana nut sheet cake was the practical, tender solution to a kitchen full of ripening bananas, the kind that spotted faster than families could eat them. Instead of wasting the fruit, older cooks mashed them into cake batter, folded in nuts, and baked the mixture in a large pan that always came out moist and fragrant. This sheet cake was soft, comforting, and topped with cream cheese frosting if the household had the ingredients on hand. It became a favorite for birthdays, potlucks, and late-night gatherings because it fed a crowd without much trouble. The flavor felt homespun, not fancy, but deeply satisfying with every bite. Children scraped frosting off the corners, adults appreciated its simplicity, and everyone loved how the bananas kept the cake tender for days. But as boxed banana breads and store-bought pastries became common, homemade banana nut sheet cake slowly disappeared. The younger generations lost touch with the joy of turning nearly spoiled fruit into something celebratory. Still, those who remember the smell of bananas warming in the oven know this cake carried a sweetness no bakery can match. Caramel layer cake was the Sunday showpiece of older generations, a dessert built around an icing that demanded patience and devotion. The layers were simple enough, but the caramel icing was where the pride lived. It had to be stirred slowly on the stove, watched closely, and poured at just the right moment before it tightened and turned grainy. Grandmothers guarded that moment like a secret, trusting instincts no recipe could teach. When it finally poured, it coated each layer in a sweetness that tasted deep and warm. On holidays, it sat in the center of the table like a small crown, but the time it required was also what pushed it out of modern kitchens. Few people today want to stand over a stove whispering prayers into a pot of sugar. So caramel layer cake slipped into memory, treasured but rarely made. Wacky cake was another Depression innovation, similar to poor man's cake, but with specific technique of making 3 wells in dry ingredients and pouring liquids directly into each. The recipe used no eggs, milk, or butter, yet produced tender chocolate cake through chemical reactions between vinegar, baking soda, and cocoa. African-American families embraced wacky cake during the 1930s and 40s when traditional baking ingredients were beyond reach. The name came from the unusual mixing method. 3 wells poked into dry ingredients in the pan, each filled with different liquid. Water was poured over everything and mixed right in the pan, eliminating need for separate bowls. This one-pan method meant fewer dishes, important when water had to be heated. The cake was moist, chocolatey, and genuinely satisfying. Children loved watching the unusual preparation, making it memorable family activity. Today, wacky cake recipes still circulate, but the tradition has lost its Depression-era context. Which forgotten pie deserves a comeback? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more lost recipes from Black Kitchens.